From the Classic 107 studios in downtown Winnipeg, 107 Live for Birchwood Jaguar, the art of performance.
I feel as though I should have stood for that, John. Welcome to the Diamond Lane and welcome here to Winnipeg. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm going to stretch this microphone as close to your face as I can get it. Now, friend, so this is your first time here.
Yes.
The Winnipeg Classical Guitar Society has invited you for their 16-17 season, and I'm so glad that they have. I've been doing a lot of reading, and what I find quite fascinating, I think, is your boundless curiosity. So could you speak to us just a little bit and our listenership kind of about your perspective on music making, how it began, the kind of journey you took to get you to this brilliant place?
Okay. Well, I've been playing music my whole life, mostly plucked stringed instruments, although I took piano lessons and a few other things when I was younger. My mother initially taught me the ukulele when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I then retaught her the ukulele about 40 years later. She'd completely forgotten that she had ever played it. And one thing led to another. When I was younger, I was most known for my banjo playing. I was a little banjo prodigy.
You have a Pete Seeger story. Do you have a Pete Seeger story?
Pete Seeger was one of the first. My parents, I never went to rock concerts as a child. My parents wouldn't take me to rock concerts. Couldn't go to the Beatles when they came to Cleveland, unfortunately. But I would see Peter, Paul, and Mary and Pete Seeger. And seeing Pete Seeger play the banjo got me interested in the banjo. I think mostly because it was just a little bit less usual than the guitar, which everybody played. And there's actually a connection between the 5-string banjo, which is America's instrument, and this Russian guitar, which I'm playing, which is really Russia's national instrument. They're both tuned to an open G chord. frequently. The banjo is tuned in many tunings, but the standard tuning is open G. Then I led to the classical guitar. I studied with Frederick Node. That led to the lute because he played the Renaissance lute. The Renaissance lute led to the Baroque lute. And then the Russian guitar is my most recent love. That started probably about 2003. And I was exposed to Oleg Timofeyev, who's sort of spearheading the revival of the Russian guitar. And I had one of his recordings, and he had some of my lute recordings. We'd never met, although he'd heard me play in person in Los Angeles, but he never introduced himself. I went to see him give a lecture recital for the Southern California Early Music Society. And seeing the Russian guitar in person, he had a very beautiful, very ornate instrument. Seeing the way the instrument, the music lay on the fingerboard, I thought, this really makes sense. And so I got interested. He was looking for a duo partner because he'd discovered just a treasure trove of duos for the Russian guitar. Asked me if I was interested. I said yes. A week later, he sent me a pile of music and this unbelievably gorgeous instrument, which I reprimanded him for sending via UPS to me. I mean, it had tortoiseshell veneer on the neck, which bothered me a little bit, I suppose, because I've had a pet turtle since I was 4 years old, the same turtle. But that turtle probably would have been long dead. The guitar was quite old. And so that got me interested in the Russian guitar. Being a Russian guitarist at the beginning of the 21st century is like being a lutenist at the beginning of the 20th century. It's just a wide open field.
Well, and perhaps is that that's what continually drives you? I'm reading about your rep lists and where you go and your recordings, and you seem to go to the farthest reaches of plucked string repertoire to find your treasure.
Yeah, because there's lots of gems waiting to be discovered. In the classical guitar world, it's easy to get burned out on the same gems that people play repeatedly. I mean, there's still gems, there's still beautiful pieces, but I think to have a career, to get record companies interested in what you're doing, you can't do just the same old thing. So you have to look for fresh material and fresh inspiration. But for me, it is just an exploration. Even if I wasn't making recordings, even if I wasn't doing it professionally, it's like time travel for me. And these old instruments are the vehicles. Poor man's time travel.
I was reading that in an interview that you did a little while ago. And, we are in the studio right now with John Schneiderman. He is here for the 1617 Winnipeg Classical Guitar Society's International Artist Series. He's playing tomorrow night at Église Précieux Sang, 200 Kenny Street. For more info, winnipegclassicalguitarsociety.com. Now, John, what is it about seeking the breadth of the repertoire that teaches you about this, about each time, and what is it that gives you this thirst for that journey, that seeking? Well,
with the Russian guitar, I was kind of pushed into it. Oleg is very ambitious, and I try to affiliate myself with people who have good project ideas and are good researchers and good scholars, and come up with music that nobody has. And with the Russian guitar, it pretty much disappeared for most of the 20th century and is only now being rediscovered. Well,
let's talk just really quickly about this instrument for our listenership who don't necessarily have the visual that I have.
Right.
So can you just describe for us this brilliant, how many strings are there? 13? No, 11?
Let's ignore these bottom four.
Okay, sure.
What makes a Russian guitar is 7 strings on the fingerboard, tuned to an open G chord.
Okay.
That's a Russian guitar. Okay. These additional basses are kind of icing on the cake. In the later 19th century, with Western European guitars and with the Russian guitar, they started extending the range a bit by adding bass strings. Having extra bass strings, anytime you have an open bass strings, it means you can travel anywhere on the fingerboard to do what you want, and you don't have to hold down a note lower down on the bass string. So it's a huge, huge advantage. So these extra 4 strings, the fact that this is an 11-string instrument is kind of irrelevant. If I had a 7-string instrument, that's probably what I would be sitting here with.
Okay, that's fair. And you play plucked instruments of all sorts. I mean, you got into the lute. There's a really funny story about you and purchasing your first lute.
Yeah, the first time I got the Baroque lute, I spent a couple months attempting it, and it really does have more strings. It was a 13-course lute. I loved the 18th century repertoire, Bach and Weiss, but I got sort of tangled, and then after a few months away from it, I thought, I'm never going to be able to sell this thing. I have to learn how to play it. So I tackled it. And the second time, I think I was a little bit more disciplined and a little bit more patient. And I took the time to unravel it.
Well, and when you began with folk and bluegrass roots, and then you go to Baroque music, there are so many parallels, aren't there? Like in terms of just improvisatory freedom. Like, was there a big parallel draw from you for you from one to the other?
Well, I try not to put too many barriers in between musical styles, if possible, and I try not to be pegged as somebody who does one thing. If you were to ask most people who are familiar with my recorded output, they would say I'm an 18th and a 19th century specialist, but I have many, many other interests. They just haven't ended up on CDs
record
yet. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, you're here in Winnipeg performing tomorrow night at Église Précieux Sang. Now, what is on the program tomorrow night?
Well, this is a unique program even for me. Normally on a program like this, I would bring 3 instruments. But let me tell you, I had a battle getting this guitar on the plane. And I can't check irreplaceable instruments with baggage or even gate checking them. It's just too much of a risk. Normally I would be bringing a Baroque lute, a Russian guitar, and a Spanish or Western European guitar to play my favorite music, my favorite 18th century music on the 13-course German D minor lute, my favorite Russian music on the 7-string open G-tuned guitar, and then my favorite music on the standard guitar. But since I couldn't fly with 3 instruments, it's progressively harder and harder to fly even with 1 instrument. I thought, well, if I have 7 strings on the fingerboard, I certainly can tune it like a Spanish guitar and play 6-string music, but how can I somehow incorporate the lute music? And when you take this open G chord, GBD, GBD, I'll try not to get too technical. If you tune the 2 Gs down to F sharp, suddenly it becomes a B minor chord, a minor third below the D minor of a lute, but intervallically the string relationships are the same. So I thought I can read straight from the tablature. It's not really even an adaptation. I can read straight from the tablature in that tuning. This guitar has the extra bass strings. So basically I'll be using it as an 11-course lute tomorrow. I'll be playing some music by Sylvius Weiss. Then I'll tune a couple of strings, play a Russian guitar set. Then during the intermission, I'll tune it up to Spanish guitar tuning and play some Cost and Mertz to finish off the program.
The versatility won in scordatura. That's great. Awesome.
Yes. Well, and this idea of playing in multiple tunings is something that I got from the banjo, especially playing traditional music on the banjo. There is not one standard tuning. You tune the instrument however you can tune it to make the piece you want to play easier to play. I never thought twice about it when I was a kid. When I got older and people started seeing me, who didn't play the banjo, constantly tuning to different tunings and to make the fingering simple.
That's cheating.
Yeah,
they
didn't quite get it, but it has huge advantages. I played this instrument for several years before I realized that it's tuned like a banjo on the top 4 strings. Of course, on the banjo, I was never reading from staff notation, not playing, Russian classical music, so it didn't strike me. But then when I did realize it, I thought, oh, okay, that's why some of this seems a little bit familiar. But of course, the musical gestures are so different that there's not a whole lot of overlap.
The tuning, yes, but the language, no.
The language, no.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, we're so glad that we get 3 instruments in one from you tomorrow night. Église Précieux Sang, 8 p.m. For more info, Winnipeg Classical Guitar Society.com, or of course our website, Classic 107. John Schneiderman, our next international artist of the WCMS season. I am so pleased that you're here and so fascinated by all the things that you're doing. I mean, you're based in California. Welcome to Winnipeg winter. You know,
I brought my warm clothes.
That's good.
It's refreshing. I love the crisp air.
And the sun today, you are
everything's
you've
melting.
been gifted by the sun. Yeah, no, well,
I brought that.
Okay, that's good. Good. Thank you for bringing the sun with you. Well, would you like to play a little bit more for this?
Sure.
Birchwood Jaguar?
This last piece I'm going to play is called the Red Seraphon. It's an arrangement of a very famous song. The arrangement was done by Andrei Sikra, who's considered sort of the patriarch of Russian guitarists. And it's not a genuine folk song. It's actually a skillful imitation by a composer by the name of Alexander Varlamov. And it's one of Russia's best-known tunes. And the subject of the original song, it's a dialogue between a mother and a daughter. The mother is sewing a red seraphon, which is the traditional wedding gown that's used in villages, and she's having a discussion with the daughter. And the mother gets carried away, and towards the end of the tune, she ends up singing her lines to the daughter's melody. So it's really it's a dialogue.
Beautiful. Player of all things plucked, John Schneiderman. You can catch him tomorrow night at Église Précieux Sang, 200 Kenny Street here in Winnipeg as part of the Winnipeg Classical Guitar Society's 1617 International Artist Series. Such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to Winnipeg. Another episode of Birchwood Jaguar 107 Live.
107 Live is Classic 107's intimate concert series, brought to you by Birchwood Jaguar, the art of performance.